The moment Amanda announced my Christmas dishes would be fed to the dogs, I smiled sweetly and declared to her shocked guests, "Well, since we're being honest tonight, let me share what Amanda really thinks about each one of you." 23 faces turned toward me with expressions ranging from curiosity to horror. Amanda's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the panic flooding her eyes as she realized her carefully constructed social facade was about to crumble. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. How did I get here? 3 days ago, I was Ella Laner Patterson, devoted mother-in-law, spending every waking moment preparing what I thought would be the perfect Christmas feast for my daughter-in-law's annual holiday party. 16 hours of cooking, hand-rolled pasta, prime rib that cost me $300, desserts that required ingredients I had to special order. All because Amanda had sweetly asked if I could contribute something small to her gathering. I should have known better. After 3 years of watching Amanda manipulate every situation to her advantage, I should have seen this coming. But grief makes you stupid, and loneliness makes you desperate. Since George died, I've been so grateful for any inclusion in my son David's life that I ignored every red flag Amanda raised. The party was already in full swing when I arrived at 7, struggling through their front door with 3 heavy casserole dishes and 2 dessert carriers. Amanda was holding court near the fireplace, stunning in a red silk dress that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. She glanced over as I set my contributions on the dining room table, her expression shifting from annoyance to something I couldn't quite identify. "Oh good," she announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "George's mom brought food too. We'll have plenty to feed the old woman's dishes to the dogs after everyone's eaten the real dinner." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Not my food, not Eleanor's cooking, the old woman's dishes, as if I was some stranger who'd wandered in off the street instead of the woman who'd helped pay for their kitchen renovation. The guests laughed nervously, clearly uncomfortable, but unwilling to challenge their hostess. That's when something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the way Amanda smirked as she said it, so confident in her power over me. Maybe it was remembering how I'd stood over that stove until my feet ached, wanting so desperately to be valued by this woman who'd never shown me an ounce of genuine respect. Or maybe it was the 3 years of swallowed insults finally demanding their due. I set down my purse, straightened my shoulders, and looked directly at Amanda's best friend, Jessica, a real estate agent who'd spent the last hour bragging about her latest sale. "Jessica, Amanda told me just last week that you're drowning in debt from that new house, and that your husband's about to leave you because you're more interested in impressing strangers than taking care of your family." Jessica's wine glass hit the floor with a satisfying crash. The room fell dead silent except for the Christmas music still playing softly in the background. Amanda's face had gone from red to white to green in the span of 5 seconds. "Eleanor, stop," she whispered. But I was just getting started. I turned to Michael, Amanda's tennis partner, who was staring at me with his mouth open. "And Michael, Amanda says you have a drinking problem, and that your wife only stays with you because she's afraid you'll hurt yourself if she leaves. She also mentioned that you smell like bourbon before noon, and that everyone at the club talks about it." Michael's confident smile evaporated. He looked around the room as if seeking escape, but every eye was fixed on him now. His wife Sarah grabbed his arm protectively, confirming what I just revealed. "Mom, please." David's voice came from behind me, but I couldn't stop now. 3 years of being the convenient target for Amanda's cruelty had built up like pressure in a steam engine. I moved to Karen and Steve, the couple Amanda always invited because they threw the best parties in the neighborhood. "Karen, Amanda thinks your marriage is a joke. She told me you only stay together for appearances, and that Steve's been having an affair with his secretary for 2 years. She said everyone knows except you." Karen's perfectly composed expression cracked. "What? And Steve?" I continued, feeling almost lightheaded with the power of speaking truth. "Amanda says, you lost most of your retirement money on bad investments, and that's why Karen had to go back to work. She thinks it's hilarious that you pretend to be successful when you're both drowning financially." The party was disintegrating before my eyes. Couples were whispering urgently to each other, some heading for the door, others demanding explanations. Amanda stood frozen in the center of it all, watching her carefully curated social circle implode. But I wasn't finished. Robert and Linda, the older couple from down the street, were backing toward the exit when I addressed them directly. Amanda calls you too, the ancient boring couple, and says you only get invited to things out of pity. She told me last month that watching you eat makes her physically ill, and that she hopes you move to a retirement community soon. Linda's eyes filled with tears. They'd been neighbors for 8 years, always ready to help with yard work, or to accept packages when no one was home. Now they knew exactly what their kindness had earned them. That's enough. David finally found his voice moving between me and his wife. Mom, what's gotten into you? I looked at my son, this man I'd raised to be kind and honest, and saw him preparing to defend the woman who just publicly humiliated his mother. What's gotten into me is 3 years of watching your wife treat me like garbage, while you pretend not to notice. Amanda finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak than her usual confident tone. Those are private conversations taken completely out of context. Are they? I asked sweetly, because I remember them quite clearly, word for word actually. The remaining guests were gathering their coats with the desperate efficiency of people fleeing a natural disaster. Amanda's carefully planned Christmas party. The social event she'd been organizing for months was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. David looked between his wife and his mother with the expression of a man watching his life explode in real time. Amanda, is this true? Do you really say these things about our friends? David, you can't seriously believe. Amanda started, but Dr. Peterson, their family dentist, interrupted her. Actually, I've heard her say similar things. He admitted quietly. At the Hendersons' barbecue last summer, I thought it was just harmless gossip, but now he shook his head and headed for the door with his wife. One by one, Amanda's friends were either leaving or confirming my revelations. The beautiful Christmas decorations that had taken her weeks to perfect now looked garish and overdone in the empty spaces left by fleeing guests. How could you know all of this? Amanda demanded, her voice rising to a near shriek. How could you possibly remember every conversation? I smiled at her, feeling lighter than I had in years. Oh honey, that's the thing about being dismissed as a useless old woman. People forget I'm even in the room. You've been saying these things right in front of me for 3 years, always assuming I was too stupid or too grateful to pay attention. The truth was even more satisfying than I'd hoped. I pulled out my phone and held it up so she could see the screen. And I've been recording our conversations for the past 6 months. Amazing what you learn when you start paying attention to how someone really talks about the people in their life. David stared at the phone in my hand as if it was a weapon. You've been recording us? Not us, sweetheart. Her every coffee date, every shopping trip, every time she called to complain about your friends, your neighbors, even your coworkers. I have dozens of hours of Amanda explaining exactly what she thinks about everyone in your social circle. Amanda lunged for my phone, but I was ready for her. I wouldn't do that if I were you. This is just one copy. I've got backups in several very safe places. The few remaining guests were openly gawking now. Phones appearing as people started recording this meltdown for their own social media channels. Amanda's reputation as the perfect hostess was being destroyed in real time, and everyone wanted evidence. Get out, Amanda whispered, her voice shaking with rage. Get out of my house right now. Gladly, I said, collecting my purse. But Amanda, the next time you want to serve my food to your dogs, you might want to make sure you know exactly who you're dealing with. I walked out of that house feeling like I could fly. Behind me, I could hear Amanda screaming at David, demanding he choose between his wife and his mother. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't worried about his answer. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it to my car. Text messages were pouring in from numbers I barely recognized. Apparently, several people at the party had shared videos of Amanda's meltdown on social media, and the story was spreading faster than I could have imagined. The first call was from Jessica, the real estate agent whose marriage I'd exposed. Instead of anger, her voice was filled with something I hadn't expected. Gratitude. Eleanor, I need to thank you, she said, barely holding back tears. You just saved my life. I had no idea people knew about our problems, and I certainly didn't know my own friends were gossiping about my marriage falling apart. Jessica, I'm sorry if I hurt you, but no, you don't understand. Mark and I talked for 4 hours last night. Really talked for the first time in months. We're going to counseling and we're going to figure this out. But if I kept pretending everything was fine while people like Amanda were laughing behind my back, she wasn't the only one. Over the next 2 days, I received similar calls from Michael, who was checking himself into rehab, and Karen, who was finally confronting her husband about his affair. Even Robert and Linda called to say they were glad to finally know where they stood with their neighbors. Not everyone was grateful, of course. David showed up at my apartment on the third day, his face drawn with exhaustion. "Mom, you destroyed Amanda's entire social circle. She's barely speaking to me, and the kids are asking why Grandma made Mommy cry." I poured him coffee from the pot I just made, noting how he automatically sat at my kitchen table the way he had as a child when he was upset. "David, I didn't destroy anything. I just revealed what was already broken. But why now? Why did you have to humiliate her in front of everyone?" I set his mug down carefully, buying myself time to find the right words. "Because for 3 years I've been trying to earn a place in your family by being useful. Cooking, cleaning, babysitting, lending money. And every single time Amanda made it clear that I was a burden she tolerated for your sake." David winced. He knew it was true. That night, when she called my food dog food in front of a room full of people, something broke in me. I realized I'd spent 3 years accepting disrespect because I was afraid of losing you and the kids. But you know what? If respecting myself means losing people who don't value me anyway, maybe that's not really a loss. My son sat quietly for several minutes, staring into his coffee cup. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "She did say those things, Mom. All of them. I heard some of the recordings when she was trying to prove you'd edited them. I had no idea she felt that way about our friends, about our life. The worst part," David continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "is that I let her treat you that way. I saw it happening and told myself it wasn't that bad, that you didn't mind, that it was just her personality." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Sweetheart, you can't control what Amanda does, but you can control how you respond to it. She wants me to cut contact with you completely. She says this was an unforgivable betrayal, and that she'll never feel safe around you again." The words hurt, but they didn't surprise me. Amanda had always been an all-or-nothing person when it came to control. "And what do you want to do?" David was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "I want my kids to know their grandmother. I want them to learn how to cook from you the way I did. I want them to understand that family doesn't get to treat each other like garbage just because they think they can get away with it." Relief flooded through me, though I was careful not to show it. "That's going to be hard on your marriage, maybe. But you know what I realized listening to those recordings? Amanda doesn't just talk about you that way. She talks about everyone that way, including me. When she thought you weren't paying attention, she spent 20 minutes telling her sister how I'm getting fat and boring and how she could have done so much better." That surprised me. I'd always thought Amanda genuinely loved David, even if she treated everyone else poorly. "I'm sorry, honey. Don't be. I needed to hear it. I've been so focused on keeping peace that I never noticed I was living with someone who doesn't actually respect me." We talked for another hour about his marriage, the kids, and what came next. When he left, he hugged me tighter than he had since he was 12 years old. "Mom, I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. It took courage to do what you did." After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about courage. Was it courageous to finally speak up after years of abuse? Or was I just an old woman who'd finally reached her breaking point? My phone buzzed with another message. This one from an unknown number. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Linda Morrison from Channel 7 News. We'd love to do a story about your Christmas party confrontation. Several viewers have sent us the videos, and we think it represents something important about family dynamics and standing up to bullies. A news story about me. 6 months ago, the thought would have horrified me. Now it felt like an opportunity. I called the number back and agreed to an interview for the following week. If Amanda wanted to paint me as the villain in this story, she was welcome to try. But I had recordings, witnesses, and 3 years of documentation about her behavior. Most importantly, I had something I'd lost somewhere in the fog of grief and loneliness. My voice. The interview aired on a Thursday evening right before the new year. I'd been nervous about how they'd edit my story, but Linda Morrison had been fair and thorough. She'd even tracked down several people from the party who were willing to confirm Amanda's history of cruel gossip. The response was overwhelming. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Women from across the country were calling to share similar stories of being mistreated by family members, of being expected to accept abuse in the name of keeping peace. But the most surprising call came from someone I hadn't expected to hear from. My late husband's attorney, Richard Wells. "Ella Lehner, I've been trying to reach you for weeks," he said. "I have some documents that George left in my care with specific instructions about when they should be delivered." "What kind of documents?" "Estate documents that were separate from his will. He was very specific that you should only receive them if certain conditions were met. Based on what I've seen in the news, I believe those conditions have been satisfied. George had left me additional estate documents. That didn't make sense. We'd gone through everything after his death, or so I thought. Richard's office was exactly as I remembered it from 3 years ago. All dark wood and legal books, but the documents he spread across his desk were completely unfamiliar. George came to see me about 6 months before he died," Richard explained. "He was concerned about how Amanda treated you and worried that after his death, the situation would get worse. He wanted to make sure you had options if things became unbearable." I stared at the papers, trying to process what I was seeing. Trust documents, property deeds, investment accounts I'd never heard of. George had been quietly moving assets for several years, creating a separate trust that Amanda and David knew nothing about. He left instructions that these documents should only be given to you if you demonstrated the courage to stand up for yourself against family abuse. The numbers on the pages made no sense. According to these documents, George had left me not just the modest life insurance policy I'd been living on, but assets worth nearly $2 million. He was monitoring Amanda's behavior toward you for years, Eleanor. He documented incidents, saved voicemails, even recorded some conversations. He was building a case to protect you, but he died before he could put his plan into action. My hands were shaking as I flipped through page after page of evidence. George had known. He'd seen what I was too lonely and grief-stricken to acknowledge: that Amanda was systematically isolating and demeaning me. The trust documents include a very specific clause. Richard continued. "If David chooses to maintain a relationship with you despite Amanda's demands that he cut contact, the trust remains in your control. But if he allows his wife to completely cut you out of their lives, the trust dissolves and the money goes to charity." George was testing David. He was protecting you both. He knew that Amanda's true nature would eventually be revealed, and he wanted to make sure David had the strength to choose family over convenience when that moment came. I thought about my son's visit 3 days ago. His decision to stand by me despite his wife's ultimatum. George would have been proud. But there was more. At the bottom of the stack was a document that made my breath catch. A detailed plan for what George called Operation Truth, complete with instructions for documenting Amanda's behavior and strategies for exposing it when the time was right. My late husband had essentially written the playbook for everything I'd done at that Christmas party, right down to the importance of having recordings as evidence. I wasn't just a grieving widow who'd finally snapped. I was carrying out a plan George had designed to save both me and our son from a woman he'd recognized as dangerous long before I was ready to see it. The question now was what to do with this unexpected inheritance and the power it represented. Amanda thought she'd won by driving a wedge between David and me. She had no idea that her victory was about to turn into the biggest miscalculation of her life. 2 days after meeting with Richard, I was sitting in my living room planning how to use George's unexpected gift when Amanda decided to declare war. The first shot came in the form of a certified letter delivered by a very nervous-looking postal worker. "Mrs. Patterson," he asked, checking his clipboard twice, "I need you to sign for this." The envelope was thick, expensive stationery with a law firm's letterhead. Inside was a cease and desist order demanding I stop spreading malicious lies about Amanda Patterson and threatening legal action if I continued my campaign of harassment and defamation. I had to laugh. After 3 years of Amanda's psychological warfare, she was now claiming to be the victim because I'd finally fought back. The timing was particularly amusing since I hadn't spoken publicly about her since the TV interview. My phone rang an hour later. David's voice was strained, exhausted. "Mom, please tell me you're not planning to escalate this situation." "What situation would that be, sweetheart?" "Amanda hired a lawyer. She's talking about suing you for damages to her reputation and emotional distress. She claims you've been systematically trying to destroy her life for months." I looked at the legal documents spread across my coffee table, George's carefully organized evidence of Amanda's behavior, and smiled. Well, that's interesting because I've been doing some legal consulting of my own. What does that mean? It means your wife picked a fight with someone who's much better prepared for battle than she realizes. The next morning, I called Richard Wells and asked him to recommend a litigation attorney who specialized in harassment cases. Within hours, I was sitting across from Patricia Morrison, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who'd built a reputation destroying bullies in court. "Mrs. Patterson," she said after reviewing Amanda's letter and George's documentation, "your daughter-in-law has made a significant tactical error. By claiming you've been harassing her, she's opened the door for us to present evidence of her actual harassment of you. We spent 3 hours going through George's files. He'd been thorough, documenting not just Amanda's treatment of me, but her behavior toward others. Credit reports showing how she'd manipulated elderly neighbors into co-signing loans. Social media posts she deleted where she mocked family members. Even recordings of phone calls where she'd threatened to keep the grandchildren away from me if I didn't comply with her demands. This woman is a sociopath," Patricia said flatly. "And now she's given us legal grounds to expose her publicly." By Thursday, Amanda had received our countersuit, harassment, elder abuse, alienation of affection, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were seeking damages, a restraining order, and most importantly, court-mandated family counseling that would require Amanda to confront her behavior under professional supervision. David called that evening, his voice shaking with something between anger and desperation. "Mom, what are you doing? Amanda's talking about leaving, taking the kids, and moving back to her mother's in California. David, I have something to tell you about your father's estate. It's going to change how you see this entire situation." I drove to David's office the next morning with a briefcase full of documents that would reshape his understanding of everything that had happened since George's death. My son looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past week. His usually neat appearance disheveled and tired. "Mom, before you say anything, I need you to know that Amanda's threatening to take the kids and disappear if this lawsuit continues. She says she has relatives in Canada who would help her stay hidden." I set the briefcase on his desk and opened it slowly. "David, your father spent the last year of his life protecting us from exactly this situation. He knew Amanda would eventually show her true nature, and he prepared for it." For the next hour, I walked my son through George's documentation. The financial abuse, the manipulation tactics, the systematic isolation of family members who didn't serve Amanda's purposes. David's face grew paler with each revelation. "Dad knew all this. Why didn't he say something?" "Because he knew you wouldn't have believed it until you were ready to see it yourself. George understood that Amanda's control over you was psychological, and that breaking it would require you to witness her behavior firsthand. The most damaging evidence was a series of emails between Amanda and her sister discussing how to manage me after George's death. They'd planned to gradually isolate me from the family while extracting as much financial support as possible. There were even discussions about having me declared incompetent so they could access my bank accounts. She was planning to have you committed. Have you, Mom? Eventually? Yes. Once she'd gotten everything she could from me financially, and I became too much trouble to manage. David sat in stunned silence, processing the betrayal. His wife hadn't just been cruel to his mother. She'd been systematically plotting to destroy me, while pretending to care about family unity. "There's more," I said gently. "George hired a private investigator to look into Amanda's background before your marriage. He was concerned about some inconsistencies in her stories about her past. The investigator's report painted a picture of a woman who'd left a trail of damaged relationships across 3 states. Amanda had been married before David, a fact she'd hidden from him. She'd also been involved in an elder abuse case in Colorado where she'd convinced an elderly man to change his will in her favor shortly before his death. She's done this before. Multiple times, George found evidence of at least 4 elderly people she'd manipulated into giving her money or property. The Colorado case was dropped when the man's family couldn't prove manipulation, but the pattern was clear. My son looked like he was going to be sick. "The kids, Mom, I can't let her take the kids. She won't because now we have leverage she doesn't know about, and we're going to use it to ensure she never has the power to threaten this family again." Patricia had already filed an emergency motion to prevent Amanda from leaving the state with the children, citing the evidence of her pattern of manipulation and the ongoing legal proceedings. But that was just the beginning. David, your father left you something else. A trust fund for the children's education and future that Amanda can't touch. But it comes with conditions designed to protect them from exactly this kind of situation. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering that left Amanda scrambling to maintain control of a narrative that was slipping away from her. Patricia had been ruthless in her filings, presenting evidence of Amanda's manipulation tactics in language that made it impossible for any judge to ignore. Amanda's response was predictably dramatic. She called a family meeting demanding that David's siblings choose sides in what she characterized as an attack on their family by a bitter old woman who couldn't accept that her son had moved on with his life. I wasn't invited to this meeting, but David called me afterward with a report that was both satisfying and sad. Mom, she tried to get Jennifer and Michael to sign a statement saying, "You've always been difficult and that this lawsuit is frivolous." She wanted them to testify that you've been jealous of our marriage from the beginning. Jennifer and Michael were David's siblings, both of whom had remained carefully neutral during my 3 years of conflict with Amanda. They had their own families to worry about, and had always taken the path of least resistance when it came to family drama. And what did they say? Jennifer asked to see some of the evidence. When Amanda couldn't produce anything to support her claims, and Jennifer saw some of Dad's documentation, she refused to sign. Michael did the same. More importantly, Jennifer had revealed something that cast Amanda's behavior in an even darker light. She told me that Amanda had approached her last year about having you declared incompetent. She wanted Jennifer to support a claim that you were showing signs of dementia and couldn't be trusted to manage your own affairs. The manipulation had been even more extensive than we'd realized. Amanda hadn't just been planning to isolate me socially. She'd been laying groundwork to have me declared mentally unfit, so she could control my finances and medical decisions. There's something else, David continued. Jennifer said, Amanda has been telling people for months that you've been acting erratically, forgetting conversations, repeating yourself. She's been building a case for incompetency for almost a year. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. While I'd been grieving my husband and desperately trying to maintain a relationship with my family, Amanda had been systematically destroying my reputation and credibility in preparation for a legal assault on my independence. But Amanda had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated both George's foresight and my willingness to fight back when cornered. That evening, Patricia called with news that changed everything. Ella Lehner, Amanda's first attorney, has withdrawn from the case. Apparently, when he realized the extent of the evidence against her and the pattern of behavior we've documented, he decided he didn't want to represent her. What does that mean? It means she's scrambling to find new representation. And any competent attorney who reviews this case is going to advise her to settle quickly and quietly. She's in a much weaker position than she realizes. The weakness in Amanda's position became apparent when David came to see me the next day with an unexpected proposal. Amanda wants to negotiate. The meeting took place in Patricia's conference room on a gray Thursday morning that felt heavy with the weight of 3 years of accumulated resentment. Amanda arrived with a new lawyer, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else in the world. I hadn't seen my daughter-in-law since the Christmas party, and the change in her appearance was startling. The confident, perfectly put-together woman I'd known had been replaced by someone who looked desperate and cornered. Her usual immaculate styling had given way to a more subdued look, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Mrs. Patterson, her lawyer, began nervously. My client would like to find a resolution to this dispute that serves everyone's best interests. Patricia smiled coldly. I'm listening. What followed was exactly what I'd expected. Amanda was willing to apologize for her behavior and agreed to family counseling in exchange for us dropping the lawsuit and agreeing never to discuss her conduct publicly again. That's not going to work, Patricia said before I could respond. Mrs. Patterson has been the victim of systematic abuse and manipulation for 3 years. A simple apology doesn't address the damage that's been done, or ensure it won't happen again. Amanda spoke for the first time since entering the room. What do you want from me? I've already lost half my friends because of your little performance at Christmas. My reputation is ruined. My marriage is falling apart, and now you're trying to take my children away from me. I looked at this woman who'd made my life miserable for 3 years, and felt something I hadn't expected: pity. She genuinely seemed to believe she was the victim in this situation. Amanda, I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. I want you to acknowledge the harm you've caused and take responsibility for changing it. And I want legal protections to ensure you never have the power to abuse me or manipulate my family again. What kind of legal protections? Patricia opened a folder and slid a document across the table. A binding agreement that specifies exactly how family interactions will proceed going forward. Supervised visitation with the grandchildren initially. Mandatory counseling and financial transparency to prevent future manipulation. Amanda's lawyer reviewed the document and whispered urgently in her ear. I could see the moment when she realized how thoroughly her position had been compromised. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. You can't dictate how I interact with my own family. Actually, we can, Patricia replied smoothly. Because the alternative is proceeding with the lawsuit, which will make all of the evidence we've gathered part of the public record. Given your history of elder abuse in Colorado and the pattern of manipulation we've documented, I suspect that won't end well for you. That's when Amanda made the mistake that revealed just how desperate she'd become. She stood up suddenly, her chair rolling backward into the wall. You think you're so smart, you old witch, but you have no idea what you're dealing with. I've destroyed better people than you, and I know things about your precious George that would make you sick if you knew the truth. The room went silent. Even her own lawyer looked horrified at the outburst. What are you talking about? David asked quietly. Amanda's eyes glittered with malice. Your father wasn't the saint you all think he was. He had secrets, dark ones, and I've known about them since before we got married. Why do you think he was so willing to document my behavior? He was protecting himself. Not you. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. What secrets? The money, Eleanor. All that money you just inherited. It didn't come from his business success like you think. Your husband was involved in something that would have destroyed your family if it had come out. Patricia leaned forward slightly. Miss Patterson, I strongly advise you not to continue this line of shut up. Amanda snapped. She wants the truth. Fine. George Patterson was laundering money for organized crime figures. That business he was so proud of, it was a front. Every dollar you just inherited is dirty money from drugs and illegal gambling operations. The silence that followed Amanda's revelation stretched until it became uncomfortable. Then I began to laugh. It started as a quiet chuckle, but grew into full-bodied laughter that made everyone in the room stare at me like I'd lost my mind. Amanda's expression shifted from triumph to confusion as I laughed harder than I had in years. Oh, Amanda, I finally managed to say, wiping tears from my eyes. You really have no idea how thoroughly you've been outplayed, do you? I opened my purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope that Patricia had given me that morning. David, sweetheart, there's something about your father I haven't told you yet. Something I learned just yesterday that changes everything we thought we knew about this situation. I slid the envelope across to my son, who opened it with trembling hands. Inside were FBI documents, surveillance reports, and official commendations dating back 25 years. Your father wasn't laundering money for criminals, Amanda. He was working with federal agents to catch people who were. For over 2 decades, George Patterson was an undercover consultant, helping the FBI track financial crimes and money laundering operations. David stared at the documents in shock. Dad was working for the FBI. He was recruited in 1998 when his business accounting firm accidentally uncovered a money laundering scheme. Instead of just reporting it, he volunteered to help catch the people involved. He spent 25 years helping federal agents build cases against organized crime figures. Amanda's face had gone ashen. That's impossible. The money we inherited isn't dirty, Amanda. It's reward money and consultant fees from helping the government recover millions of dollars in criminal assets. Every penny is not only legal, but represents your father's service to his country. Patricia smiled as she pulled out another document. Which brings us to the real reason for today's meeting. You see, when Amanda made those accusations about George Patterson, she revealed knowledge of criminal activities that she couldn't possibly have known about unless she was involved herself. Amanda's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she was staring at me with the expression of someone watching their world collapse. The FBI has been investigating the Colorado money laundering case, that Amanda was involved in 3 years ago. They've been building a case against a network of people who target elderly individuals for financial manipulation. Amanda's name has been on their radar for quite some time. I looked at my daughter-in-law with something approaching satisfaction when you threatened to expose George's criminal activities. You revealed that you know details about money laundering operations that only someone involved in criminal financial manipulation would know. You essentially confessed to federal crimes while trying to threaten me. I never said I was involved in anything. You knew specific details about money laundering techniques and referenced criminal organizations that haven't been made public. The only way you could know those details is if you've been part of similar operations yourself. Patricia opened her laptop and turned it toward Amanda. We've been recording this meeting and everything you've said is being reviewed by federal agents. The patterns of elder abuse, the financial manipulation, the systematic targeting of vulnerable individuals, it all fits the profile they've been developing. Amanda's lawyer stood up abruptly. This meeting is over. My client won't be saying another word without a federal defender present. But the damage was done. In trying to destroy me with lies about George, Amanda had revealed her own involvement in the exact type of criminal enterprise my husband had spent decades fighting against. As they rushed out of the conference room, David sat staring at the FBI documents with tears in his eyes. Mom-Dad was a hero. He was. And his final case was protecting his family from someone he'd recognized as a predator long before the rest of us saw the truth. 6 months later, Amanda was convicted of elder abuse and financial fraud in 3 states. The investigation revealed a network of people who systematically targeted elderly individuals, manipulated their families, and stole their assets. My testimony helped prosecutors understand how sophisticated these operations had become. David got full custody of the children, and we rebuilt our family relationships on a foundation of honesty instead of fear. The kids learned the truth about their grandfather's service to his country, and their grandmother's courage in exposing a criminal who had infiltrated our family. As for me, I used George's inheritance to establish a foundation that helps elderly people recognize and report financial abuse. We train families to spot manipulation tactics and provide legal support for people fighting predators like Amanda. Sometimes I think about that Christmas party and how a moment of public humiliation became the first step in uncovering a federal crime. George would have appreciated the irony that his final undercover operation involved using his own wife as bait to catch a criminal who thought she was too old and too naive to fight back. But I learned something that night that serves me well in my new role as an advocate for elder rights. Never underestimate an angry grandmother with nothing left to lose. And a lifetime of experience in recognizing people who mistake kindness for weakness. The truth really did set us all free. And sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to stay silent when someone assumes you're too powerless to fight back. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.